Hi, this is Matthew Kenselo, and in this video, all I want to do is just share a story. It's called The Revolutionary Time Machine. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because lately, while I was transcribing my journals every day from exactly 1 decade previous, I was transcribing, working hard almost every day on this project for world history and geography. This was a project about the French Revolution, and all we had to do was do a creative writing story or an allegory of the French Revolution. And that is very dangerous for teachers who know me, because I could really go on and on. I mean, this is 20 pages, not including the 3 pages of vocabulary at the end. And I did most of the illustrations too. And this project is mentioned in my book, Juggling the Issues Living with Asperger's Syndrome, twice. I referred to it twice in this book, which I'll get to after I tell the story if you're interested in the story. Part of it was, creative writing, how much I love writing, and I could write for pages. I mean, later that year for Comp Lit, I've written 32 pages, or over 8,000 words and such, for a 3 to 5 page creative writing assignment task. So I just go overboard. I also mention it, I believe, in the short story about group projects and needing to share, and how it's just easy for me not only to dominate conversations, which is in another chapter, but also dominate group projects. It's like I have the idea, and as an autistic, it's just hard to share ideas a lot of the times. So not surprisingly, I did 99.99% of that storybook and such. Now, I do have to give credit to the person. Mr. Blaze is the name of the teacher, and that came from my partner. My partner added a couple of drawings in it, and helped at the very beginning with basic research and such. But I did like 99% of it, and it was also hard to coordinate. And as an autistic, it's hard to communicate to people and such, like outside of class, that is. But that's a very long story. Again, in this video, I'm just going to be reading that story. But overall, I spent hours and hours and hours. I stayed till closing at the school library, and then I'd stay till closing at the local library, the community library. I even had to go to a friend of my mother's house just to use her computer and print out some stuff. I did most of the illustrations. All the illustrations that I'm going to show you throughout this video is what I've done and such, just going overboard and such. And so one day, and this is already past the 10-year anniversary because I just transcribed it recently, but this is kind of the grade, 100%. Wow, fantastic detail, great detail, fantastic, excellent, outstanding, and such, and just got 100%. And he said it's the best he's ever read by far. My teacher did at Newport Harbor High School, World History and Geography, 10th grade. Just to add a few disclaimers, I was 15 at the time, 10 years ago in 2010. I was a student learning this stuff. I did a whole lot of research, as you could tell, but I'm not a PhD in history, so I can't say how accurate everything's going to be. Even some of the things on the side, like how things may have looked and all that. And from a literary standpoint, I wasn't as grammatical back then. I've still had a few things to learn through creative writing, and so I adjusted accordingly for the most part, but there may be some grammar errors as well. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoy. The Revolutionary Time Machine. Excerpts from the Introduction. This book encloses what it would be like during and after the French Revolution. It could be a type of simulator, as if you were already there. Go ahead and substitute your name with one of the 2 main characters, Joey and Jill. Pretend that you were actually there. In this book, it contains the Bastille, the jail, the storming of the Bastille, and the Reign of Terror. After the Reign of Terror came Napoleon. Enjoy reading your journey through the French Revolution. P.S. Just to say, there may be words and description in this book that might cause readers to be anxious. Chapter 1. The Time Machine. It's due tomorrow, stated Mr. Blaze. Me and my partner, Jill has procrastinated on the French Revolution project that is due tomorrow. I don't know how it happened. I guess next time we shouldn't play a lot of video games first instead of waiting to do our project. Now here we are after class begging as a 4-year-old for help. We need to pass this project to pass the 5th grade. It is the final 200-point project. Jill and I got fortunate and Mr. Blaze gave us help by giving us a secret computer to work on. He gave us the code 7141789. It was about 2:55 p.m. Jill and I walked to where Mr. Blaze said the teachers' computers were. Then we saw a strange light in the room next to it. With our lack of resistance, we were pretty curious. We crept in to find one computer in a tiny room. "Hey, what's that?" questioned Jill. I looked to the floor. There was a piece of paper on the ground. I picked it up, and there was what looked like a username and password. I walked to the computer and typed in username, COMPUTER1TIME. Then password, TIMEMACHINE. Jill pressed enter, as she usually likes to do. Up on the screen popped up a box. It stated, type your project, then numbered code. "Ah, let's just type in the code Mr. Blaze gave us," said Jill. 7141789, I typed. "What's our project?" I asked Jill. "Try French Revolution," Jill said. "Hurry, it is 3:12 p.m. FRENCHREVOLUTION, I typed. Enter, Jill pressed. Then the lights flickered like a power surge. The room shook. We raced to the door, but it was shut tight. Jill and I couldn't get it open. The lights went dark. Out from the computer approached a white tornado-like phenomena. It came towards us. It sucked Jill and I up in this type of portal that transported us from one continuum to another. Next thing I knew, after my roller coaster experience, we were in a vast field. We just stood there for a moment. "Where are we?" asked Jill. "We're like in a village," I answered. We walked around to investigate. We saw a man going up to a house. We followed him to see what he was doing. A man inside opened the door. We heard chattering, but couldn't comprehend. The man inside looked angry and gave him a lot of gold. The man who collected the gold walked away to another house with a smile on his face. We walked over to the man in the house. He swung the door very hard, thinking that it was another tax collector, I presume. He apologized when he realized that we weren't tax collectors. I asked him who that man was, already thinking that he was a tax collector. I was right. Jill asked why he made an angry face. He said, back in the day, they didn't have high taxes. King Louis XVI raised the taxes recently. King Louis XVI? Jill was surprised. Recently? I was shocked. 1789, Jill remembered from the code. 714, I remember too. Time machine, Jill and I said together. We're back in time, Jill said. Excuse me, stated the man. What are you talking about? Time machine. Thank you, I said and walked away, continuing a journey for explanations, thinking how we're going to get back 221 years from now. We ran across two men arguing. Get off my land, bourgeoisie, one said. This was initially my land, said the other. They're fighting, exclaimed Jill. I shouldn't be talking to you, bourgeoisie. Then that one stormed off. We rushed over to the bourgeoisie. Are you all right? Jill asked him. Yes, thank you, little girl. What's your name? He asked Jill. Jill, this is Joey. What's yours? Jill asked him. Benjamin, he replied. I asked, why is all this happening? Who was that? Do you know? Why was he shouting at you? Do you know why? Why? Why so many questions? Benjamin asked. Oh, that's Joey, Jill answered. Benjamin sat us down. We took 3 pails and turned the pails upside down. Okay, I am a bourgeoisie. We belong to the third estate. Those who are bourgeoisies, peasants, etc. My folks were pretty poor, but not as poor as others as the third estate. Yet we are the prosperous people in the third estate. Now the bourgeoisie does have a form of education than the rest of the third estate, hence the name bourgeoisie. Now the first state is the clergy or the church. They pay the least taxes. We have only a little education, although we may not attend the best institution of higher education. It is also the church. It holds only 0.5% out of everybody. Now who you just saw was a noble, or aristocracy. He belongs to the second estate. Only 1.5 of everybody is in the second estate. Thus, the first and second estate, only 2% of them, has additional conveniences. That leaves 98% of us as the third estate. We really think that all this is unfair. The other estates live good accommodations and went to the best schools. Now the first and second estate have lower taxes, while the rest of us have high taxes. And this is from the rule of the king? I asked. Yes, Benjamin replied. Where would we find King Louis XVI? Asked Jill. Right now he is probably at his palace in Versailles, he replied. He used our high taxes to pay for so much gold and huge fountains. Chapter 2. The Bastille. We jogged over to the Versailles, where we approached two strong-looking guards. We need to talk urgently to King Louis XVI, I told one of them. Why? We think the high taxes are unfair, Jill exclaimed. Not a chance, said the other guard. Please? Asked Jill. Get out of here. There is not any need to bother the king about that topic, said a guard. But this is, I started. Just get lost, children. Another guard came from the palace door. How rude of all of you, Jill expressed her feelings. Jill? I tried to stop her before she got us in trouble. Joey, please, Jill whispered to me. All right. If that is how you want it to be, we're going to put you into the Bastille, minor or not. You don't insult the people with the authority to lock you up, yelled the guard. Go ahead. We are going to protest that your government isn't fair. High taxes, unequal people. Jill unbelievably wanted to go to jail. I couldn't believe it. Jill? I stretched her name. Fine, the guard said. It took 2 guards for each of us in order to drag us over to the Bastille. Jill just couldn't keep quiet. I expected a day like this, but not to be kept in a prison cell. We got to the Bastille. The walls were rough stone. They chained us by the arms. Our waist was chained to the stony wall. There was a half-opening oval in the wall for a window with bars. The inmate closest to the window looked old. He looked as if he had been there for 20 years. He had a long white beard and uncombed hair. He was chained by the wrist, arms, and legs. Another inmate, kind of bit, looked the same way, with a shorter beard. The guards just left us there, and we felt hopeless. We did start a nice conversation with the other prisoner. What are you in for? I asked. Oh, 10 years ago I was caught with theft. I was convicted, and now here I am, he replied. Jill asked the other inmate, You don't look like you've been here long. What are you in for? Just 8 months ago, I was too aggravated about the high taxes. All of our taxes were given to the king so he could buy gold and his palace furniture, he answered. Do you know the date? I asked the man with the long beard. I do not have any clue. I have been here so long, I lost track 7 years ago. Do you know what the date is? Jill asked the other man. I was sentenced here September of 1788, so it must be May of 1789, the man answered. Oh, that's right, said the man with the long beard. So it's been exactly 10 years. I was sentenced here in May of 1769. That would be 20 years, Jill corrected him. Has it only been 20 years, he said. Well, Joey, Jill told me, it seems like what is going to be the French Revolution is all about King Louis XVI. We figured it out. Wait till we tell Mr. Blaze and the whole class, I said. King Louis XVI happened to be walking by at the time with a group of men. The king wanted to show them the Bastille. We all who were in the cell were flabbergasted when the king entered. We couldn't believe it. He looked at us and called in the guards. Bernard, why are there children in the Bastille chained up like an adult? King Louis XVI asked the guard, whose name was Bernard. The girl over there is really the person why we had to do it. You see, they came to the doors of the palace claiming they urgently needed to speak to you, something important. She said to go ahead and put her in jail. We put the boy in chains too. She said she was going to protest about your unfairness, said Bernard. The king made an understanding face. Unchain them, the king told Bernard. What? Asked Bernard. Unchain them. exclaimed the king. Bernard unchained us, and King Louis XVI told us to come with him to Versailles. Everyone met at the Palace of Versailles. I was the first to ask a question. Who are all these people here? They're the Estates General, King Louis XVI answered. Representatives or members of each estate makes up the Estates General. When did you become king, I asked. Since 1784, he told us. What an argument! Jill and I could easily tell that the Third Estate associates were furious, and most of the people were from the Third Estate because the majority of the people were from the Third Estate by far. They constructed the Cahiers de Doléances. That is an inventory of troubles that they have. A month went by. It was June of 1789. Jill and I started missing our home and even our school. Missing our school and even Mr. Blaze was a shock to us. Benjamin let us live in his little cabin. He had the correct date. We went back near the Palace of Versailles on June 20th, 1789. Something caught the corner of my eye. A group of people, some who dressed like Benjamin, were entering a building that looked like a tennis court. We went in to investigate what was happening. There was a guy in the middle on a table. We saw people up in the windows. We were there for a while. This is my perspective of the story. All the people from the Third Estate took what is called the tennis court oath. They signed a document stating that they swore they would never separate themselves from the National Assembly and to mend together no matter what the happenstance beseeches of them, until they get the Constitution of their Commonwealth rightfully authorized and ascribed on rock-solid foundations. 376 people signed it out of the 377. Chapter 3. The Storming of the Bastille. How are we going to get out of this time period? I asked Jill. I don't know. Mr. Blaze's code, probably? I did figure out something. His code was 7141789, Jill answered. Yeah, so? I didn't have any idea where she was going with this. July 14th, 1789, she explained. Then it hit me. I realized it all. Mr. Blaze probably knew that we would not resist going into the room with the time machine computer in it. He probably knew we were going into that room, I told Jill. That room was on the way to the room he sent us to, between his room and that room. Thus the room in question probably is now a question whether that room exists or not. So that alleged room probably allegedly did not exist. That room is, Jill confusingly said. What? It was hard to comprehend. The room probably didn't exist, she replied. Really? Why didn't you just say so? Then I started being funny. Well, we should wait till July 14th then. Then we would see why that date is significant. We're just going to have to wait. Just going to have to wait, I said to Jill. July 14th, 1789 came. We woke up and Benjamin was not anywhere to be found. After a long, long while of searching and thinking where he might be, we just went to the Versailles to see if a special thing would happen there. Maybe it has something to do with the high taxes or something like that. We saw the Bastille that once kept us every time we walked by. This day was different. Approaching the Bastille came a mob of people, it looked like. We heard shouting and yelling. Anger seemed to be all they were having in their minds. We sprinted over there for answers and explanations. What is going on here? I asked one of them. Out of my way, child, he answered. He shoved me aside and then continued walking. How rude, Jill couldn't help to say. I guess they're really set on and content on doing what they're doing, I told Jill. Then we saw Benjamin. He was carrying a musket. We rushed toward him. Where did you all get the muskets? Jill asked. Earlier, we stormed the Hôtel des Invalides and got all these. Benjamin seemed to not want to lose focus. What are you all doing now? I asked. We are doing it. We're really going to do it, he answered. We are going to storm the Bastille. Then he walked away. Jill and I gasped. Of course, I said. That's right, Jill added. Storming of the Bastille. How could we have forgotten? But why did they need to storm the Bastille? I asked. Then we found Benjamin and asked him. All the weapons we are carrying are all unloaded and such, he answered. We need powder and ammunition that are hoarded in the Bastille. Now I wouldn't want anything to happen to you children. Please go back to my house or somewhere." Then Benjamin stormed off with the others. We stood in silence amongst all the people marching past us. We just couldn't help it. We followed right behind them. There were only 7 people in the Bastille at the time all this was going on. It was early in the afternoon. Chains from the drawbridges were cut apart. When Jill saw that it came down and killed a person, tears filled her eyes. We heard of the storming of the Bastille, but we didn't really know it was this overwhelming. Then the gunshots were fired. The first few gunshots were super loud and frightened us. Jill screamed so loud it made me shake a little. Hours went by, watching the horrid reality battle take place right before our eyes. By that time, Jill couldn't help but cry. Ashamed to admit it, I started tearing up too. It was then when Jill and I had to go into the Bastille. Through the smoke we saw Benjamin. He was lying on the ground. He was accidentally shot. The person who shot him was in tears over him. With my health skills, I found that he didn't have a pulse. I told Jill and the man who shot him. They both broke down. As the battle went on, we were sitting there. It seemed like a half hour. Jill said it seemed like 2 hours. The day went on. Jill and I calmed down. It took the man a little bit longer. Chapter 4. The Reign of Terror. We were walking home. Jill was crying. Then all of a sudden, we felt this huge, strong breeze. We turned around to see a big tornado-like phenomena again. We became scared for a minute, and then realized what was happening. It sucked Jill and me up again. We were transported back to the 21st century in the same place and at the same time. I looked up at the clock. 3:12 p.m., I said. Same time when you told me to hurry. We haven't left for 1 second, Jill added back. Now we know how to write our essay. I was so happy. Yes, Jill was happy too, without a hint that she had been crying. Wait, I exclaimed. We still have to state something like, how many departments were there in France at the time? Jean-Paul Marat, the Reign of Terror, Napoleon, etc. Oh, that's right, Jill remembered. Hey, we have a time machine now. Should we use it again? I didn't think it was okay for some reason. Sure, Jill said. I walked to the computer. I typed in the username and password. Wait, we didn't get back here till the day the code was 7141789. Also, what code should I type up this time? When I was done talking, just the desktop popped up. Hey, I said. That wasn't like that before, Jill added. There was an icon I noticed titled Time Machine 5000. I double-clicked it. It said, choose your starting point. That wasn't like that before. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. I couldn't believe what I found out. What? Jill was curious. Mr. Blaze did know everything about this. He sent us to a room that probably didn't exist. He knew we were going to come here, so somehow he made a light appear so we would have to come in here. He already set up the starting point. All we had to do is just type up the code he gave us, which was a date. I just got everything. Very clever. Mr. Blaze just wanted to help us, Jill followed along. Maybe we should go to learn about the Reign of Terror, I suggested. I do know that it must be in our oral report. I remember that it was from June 27th, 1793 to July 27th, 1794. I know that because it's exactly 13 months. But do we really want to stay in the 18th century for that long? Just go ahead. It wouldn't even be a second here in the 21st century, Jill said. I know, but computers weren't invented back then. We'd be stuck there for 13 months. I started to panic. Get a hold of yourself, Joey, Jill told me. Isn't it worth it, though? I stood and thought about it. Okay, I answered. 6271739, I typed from the project and code. Enter, Jill pressed. Reign of Terror. 7271794, I typed from the project and code. Are you sure and ready? I asked Jill. Of course, Jill replied and pressed enter. The room shook. The white tornado phenomena appeared again and sucked us up back to the 18th century once again. We landed in a dusty road. Up the road was a man walking, holding a stack of papers. We came toward him and introduced ourselves. Hi, this is Jill. I'm Joey. What's your name? I asked. Marat. Jean-Paul Marat, he answered back. Not the journalist, are you? Jill asked. Yes, that is me, he replied back. Jill and I couldn't believe we met a journalist. Then we remembered something. Jean-Paul Marat. I remember what happens to him. I sensed that Jill remembered too. Before we had a chance to tell him, he said, I'm late, I got to go. We felt like it was too late. We might not get a chance to tell him that 16 days later he is going to be killed in a bathtub. Jill and I just continued to walk on and to discover more answers. Then we met another man named Bartholomew Cornelius Miller. He looked sad. I asked why he looked so sad. I'm just still overwhelmed with losing the church land, he said. What happened? Jill asked. Our Catholic Church is attached to the financial classification by the new government that we now have. In order to pay off the amount, assignats were brought out by the National Assembly. Assignats are basically like money, but paper money though, not real money, he said. They took our ownership of the land so that they would pay off what they owe. Oh, I am sorry to hear about that, I said. Take good care of yourself, children. I got to go now, he said. Bye, Jill and I both said. Later we ran into another man who looked really happy. He was also carrying a stack of papers. Hello, we said to him and introduced ourselves. Why are you so happy? I asked. Well, it was not so long ago. Actually, it was April 24th, 1792, when I finally wrote the song called Chant de guerre pour l'armée de Rhin, he answered. Where were you at when you wrote that song? I was so curious. I was at Strasbourg, he answered. What is your name? Jill asked. Claude Joseph Roger de Lille. I composed the song in the same year, 1792, he replied. He was very excited. Where is Strasbourg? I curiously asked. A department of France toward the northeast, he replied. How many departments are there in France? I wanted to know. 83, he answered. Jill and I both whistled. Could you tell us everything that is happening in the government or somewhere? I asked. Where would I begin? He replied. Well, in 1791, they written a constitution called the Constitution of 1791. According to it, it states that France will now act as a constitutional monarchy. The group of people who brought this act forward is called the Legislative Assembly. It was changed to a republic on September 21st, 1792. That was acknowledged by the National Assembly. Then the monarchy was overthrown and changed to a constitutional monarchy. The National Assembly were also the ones who authorized the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which put an end to feudalism. It was August 26, 1789 when that happened. King Louis XVI was guillotined on January... What? Jill asked. King Louis XVI was arrested on August 13, 1792. On January 21, 1793, a Monday, they beheaded him by guillotine. The national razor, Roger de Lille answered. I remember now, I said. I remember hearing that his head was shown to the people there and people would cheer. Eventually, July 13, 1793 came by. We rushed to where Marat was at after we found out where he was staying. I was sure that this was the day. We went to see if we could go to where he was and warn him about what's going to happen. It was too late. Behind a door came a ghostly stabbing noise. We rushed to find a place to hide, for the murderer would come out any second. Behind the furniture, we heard what sounded like a metal knife drop. A woman came out and left the room. When we knew that the coast was clear, we came out from hiding. We slowly approached the door, crept inside, and saw Marat in the bathtub. The knife was dropped on the ground. He was leaning over the side of the bathtub. We saw the bloody cut where he was stabbed. He looked as if he was writing on some papers. We slowly walked out the door of the house. We didn't know what to do for over a year now. 4 days went by. Justice was served. The woman who stabbed Marat was Marie Anne Charlotte de Corday. She was guillotined on July 17th, 1793. We witnessed it. Boy, throughout the time we were there, we got really afraid. So many people were guillotined. Jill and I watched some of them. If we saw another bodiless head on a stick, we would be as sick as a dog. Jill and I got a lot of anxiety about it all. A lot of what-if questions exploded in our minds. Some nights we couldn't sleep. Pictures kept running in our minds. Jill and I didn't want to go back there. Finally, the end of the Reign of Terror ended and we were transported back to the school. Chapter 5. The Final Project. Well, that was interesting, Jill told me. Yeah, did you also notice their uniform fashion? I asked her. Who? She asked me. The French radicals, I replied back. The sans-culotte and bonnet rouge they wore must have been really popular back then. We really know a lot now about those times, Jill said. We're going to get an A+++. Do you know who was responsible for the Reign of Terror? This was the question Jill knew the answer to. She asked to quiz me. Yes, they are the Montagnards, Jacobins, surveillance committees, and revolutionary tribunals. How about we look up Napoleon in the history book instead of using the time machine? It really saves us time, though. We should be 11 now instead of 10. It's like we didn't leave, I said. Sure, she said. I don't want us to get in real danger in those exciting times. They probably might not have any more terror, though. But we have enough now. I have an idea. You write what you remember, and I write what I learned from the book about after the Reign of Terror. Then we'll alternate. You will write what you learn about what you learned from the book, and I will write about what I remember. Then we will combine them both. That would just be swell, I told her, and then we gave a handshake on it. To put this in context, this next section of the chapter is toward the end of Joey and Jill's oral presentation. In conclusion, fellow classmates, the Revolution's final 4 years changed from a republic to a directory. A directory would be a 5-man oppressive group of ruling, I taught the class. And Napoleon also became the first consul at the end of the French Revolution. In continuance, Napoleon was the first consul when the empire was starting. During his reign, there were reforms in education. They had different types of schools. Primary, secondary, technical, and stressed discipline, or military schools, Jill said. In 1804, the Napoleonic Codes came out. This states that there will not be any more feudal rights, having trial by jury, and freedom of religion, I added. There were rights for individuals. There were differences in the court system and prisons. In court, a person would be equal with everybody else and it's fair. In 1810, there was a force of secret police. That is where people could be arrested without having a trial, Jill added on to. National Assembly is Parliament. Every single law in France back then was made by King Louis XVI. When Napoleon was reigning, there were 2 National Assembly or 2 parliaments. That was their way of governing France, I continued. The Catholic Church was also practiced in the ancient regime. An agreement was made by the Pope and Napoleon called the Concordat. The Concordat is where the Church would not have their land returned. The Church is also acknowledged as a religion by most of the people, I said to everyone. It was the year of 1812. Napoleon seemed to have wanted to dominate the entire world. They were attacking Russia when a series of attacks took place. Ultimately, it brought Napoleon to his downfall. Him losing caused the French Revolution era to a halt and stopped, Jill concluded. After the Directory became dictator, I took a big sigh of relief. Thus, that concluded our exciting times brought to you of the French Revolution. Jill and I took a big sigh of relief after we finished our oral report. The whole entire class cheered and applauded. Bravo, Joey and Jill. Bravo, Mr. Blaze told us. Some students stood up. The best one, guys, said Mr. Blaze. Best one in the 27 years I have been teaching. You deserve 110%. The cheering and whistling continued, thus concluding the epic and heroic tale. The conclusion. Thank you for reading your adventure. How do you like it? What? Oh, that's fantastic news. Glad you liked it. You just read the story about war, terror, the 3 estates, estates general, people, government, etc., along with how France used to be an absolute monarchy, then limited monarchy, republic, directory, and then a dictator under Napoleon. A lot of people living in the time of the French Revolution were real, except Benjamin and the man who shot him, Bernard the guard, along with 2 men in the Bastille, Bartholomew the priest as well. Sad to admit, even Joey, Jill, and Mr. Blaze. I guess you figured that by now. The Bastille was a prison, and many men stormed it for gunpowder and stuff. There were hundreds to thousands of people guillotined during the Reign of Terror, including King Louis XVI. There was really a tennis court oath on June 20th, 1789, as well as the Declaration of the Rights of Man on August 26, 1789. I guess you also noticed that I typed out the dates too, just to write them down. Hope you enjoyed the book. Why not share it to your teachers? Aha! Thank you again. So here on page 78 of my book, under the short story Creative Writing, I put, in 10th grade World History and Geography class during the fall of 2010, our teacher assigned a project to write about the French Revolution, either as a storybook or an allegory. In this first-person story, which I titled The Revolutionary Time Machine, 2 kids procrastinated on the same project that I was just assigned. They found a secret computer, typed in a few codes that I made very specific, as you heard, and were transported back in time to the French Revolution. I must have spent tens of extra hours writing this short story, and additional hours drawing most of the illustrations. Sometime after I turned in the story with over 20 pages, my teacher said that it was the best one that he ever read. By far, he appended. The project got 100%. And then later, on page 204 in the chapter, or the short story Sharing Ideas, I just briefly talk about it. In sophomore year, I did 99% of the work in a creative writing project for world history class regarding the French Revolution, and practically the entire PowerPoint presentation regarding Cuba. So I just love writing, love creative writing, but sometimes it's hard to share ideas. But if you want more information, I have a short story of that in my book. So I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you.